During a traffic stop, the officer said, "Step out of the vehicle." When I complied, he arrested me for no reason. "License and registration, please." The officer in his mid-40s leaned against my car door with his flashlight aimed at my face. I handed over my documents, trying to keep my hands steady. I hadn't been speeding. I'd used my signal when I changed lanes. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked, watching him inspect my photo with this creepy smile. "Step out of the vehicle." His hand rested on his holster. "What? Why? What did I do?" My voice cracked. I'd never even gotten a parking ticket before. "Step out. Now." The way he said it made my body go cold. I opened my car door, and the second my feet hit the pavement, he spun me around and pressed me against my car. "You're under arrest." The handcuffs clicked around my wrists before I could even process what was happening. "For what?" "You have to tell me what for." I tried to turn my head to look at him, but he held me firm against the car. "Resisting arrest." He said it like it was a line from his script. "I'm not resisting. I got out when you asked. This is insane." My voice echoed off the empty road. He walked me to his patrol car, his grip on my arm tight enough that I knew there'd be marks later. At the station, the booking area was busy with actual criminals. Two guys who looked like they'd been in a bar fight, a woman screaming about her boyfriend, and me in my work clothes, a substitute teacher who'd been driving home from parent conferences. "I'll take this one," the officer who arrested me announced to the room. The female officer at the processing desk looked up from her computer. "Actually, I can handle her. You've been on shift for 12 hours already." His jaw tightened. I said, "I've got this one." His eyes were going manic. "But our protocol says female arrestees should be processed by female officers when available," she said again. He clenched his teeth at her. "And protocols are flexible." He tightened his grip on my arm. My blood ran cold instantly. My dad was a retired officer, and he'd taught me that officers who deliberately ignore protocol always have bad intentions. He proceeded to lead me past the normal processing area toward a dark hallway. I knew from my dad's teachings this wasn't where they usually took people. We ended up in a small interrogation room with buzzing fluorescent lights and a metal table bolted to the floor. He set a clear plastic box on the table. "Empty your pockets. I want to call my husband. I know my rights and..." After processing, he cut me off and pointed at the box. "Everything out of your pockets. Now." I pulled out my phone, my wallet, a pack of gum, some receipts from the grocery store. He picked up each item and examined it. "Jewelry off," he said. I removed my wedding ring, my watch, the silver bracelet my sister gave me for my birthday. He held each piece up to the light before dropping them in the box. "I need to do a search," he announced. "Excuse me?" My stomach dropped. "A search. Now turn around, put your hands up slowly, and press them against the wall." "You need a female officer for that," I protested. But he was already uncuffing me and moving me toward the wall by my hips. "It's just a pat-down. Completely legal. Unless you want to make this harder and add more charges." His tone made it clear that wasn't really a question. I put my hands against the cold concrete wall. "Good job," he said slowly, making me shudder. He started working at my shoulders, patting down my arms and squeezing each time he made contact. His hands slowly moved to my sides, lingering around and under my chest and stomach for way too long. Then he examined the back pockets of my jeans twice. The first time, he moved his hands down slowly, not breaking contact with the back of my jeans. Second time, he put his hands inside the pocket and started squeezing around, looking for drugs. I felt violated. "Spread your feet," he instructed next. I felt sick but did it anyway. This fat sack of crap in his 40s started patting down the outside of my legs, then the insides of my thighs, gliding his hand over the denim jeans way slower than was necessary. He made me lift each foot so he could take my shoes off and check inside. Another officer walked past the open door, glanced in, and just kept walking. Nobody thought this was strange, apparently. The officer then took his finger and traveled it up my torso until he landed on my necklace. "Take that off. Please, it's not valuable. It was my mother's. She passed away last year and..." "Everything off means everything." His fingers were already reaching for it. His fingers undid it for me, and after slowly taking it off my neck, he opened the locket and stared at the picture of my 12-year-old daughter. "Pretty," he said. Then he looked closer. My daughter was wearing her school uniform in the picture, and he recognized it. "Now I know exactly where to find you," he said. Then he put the locket in his pocket. My eyes instantly shot open. "That locket goes in the box with everything else," I protested, my voice shaking with anger now. "Does it now?" He leaned against the table looking completely relaxed. "How do you know where it goes?" "Because that's the protocol. You put my property in that box, and I get it back when I'm released." "When you're released." He nodded, sarcastically and slowly. "About that. Turns out there was a mistake." He walked to the door and opened it. I followed him back through the hallway to the booking area where the female officer looked up from her computer. He handed her a clipboard with some papers and she processed them without saying anything. 5 minutes later, I was standing outside the station with a citation paper in my hand that said I was charged with resisting arrest. My hands shook as I walked to my car in the parking lot. I got in and locked all the doors. The citation paper sat on the passenger seat with that stupid charge checked off. I tried to grip the steering wheel, but my hands were shaking too bad. 20 minutes passed while I just sat there. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his finger on my daughter's picture. I heard his voice saying he knew exactly where to find me. My phone buzzed with a text from my husband asking where I was. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. The clock on my dashboard said it was almost midnight. I checked my rearview mirror every few seconds as I drove. A car behind me made the same turn I did. My heart started racing. I took a random right turn down a street I never use. The car kept going straight. I took 3 more random turns just to make sure nobody was following me. My hands were still shaking on the wheel. I kept checking the mirror. Every set of headlights behind me made my stomach drop. I finally pulled into my driveway at 12:15. My husband was waiting up. The living room lights were on. I walked in through the front door and he took one look at my face. He knew something terrible had happened. He knew it was more than just getting arrested. I started crying before I could even say anything. He held me for a minute while I tried to calm down enough to talk. Then I told him everything. I started with the traffic stop and how the officer's hand went to his gun. I told him about the handcuffs and the booking area and the female officer who tried to help. I described the interrogation room and the search that went on way too long. My voice shook when I got to the part about the locket. My husband's face went hard when I said the officer looked at our daughter's picture and recognized her school uniform. When I repeated what he said about knowing where to find us, my husband stood up fast. He wanted to get in the car right then and go to the station. He wanted to confront them and make them give back the locket. I grabbed his arm and begged him to wait. I told him we needed to think clearly and do this the right way. He was so angry his hands were in fists, but he sat back down. He looked at my wrists and saw the red marks from the handcuffs. He went to get his phone and started taking pictures. He photographed both wrists from different angles. Then he took pictures of the bruises forming on my arms where the officer had gripped me. The marks were already turning purple. My husband's jaw was tight the whole time, but his hands were gentle. After the photos, he got his laptop and opened a new document. We spent the rest of the night writing down everything I could remember. I gave him timestamps for when the traffic stop happened and when we got to the station. I wrote down exact quotes from what the officer said. I described the interrogation room and the plastic box and every single thing that happened during the search. My husband typed it all while I talked. When I got too upset to continue, he would wait until I was ready. We finished around 3 a.m. I went to the bedroom and took off the clothes I'd been wearing. I felt gross in them. I remembered seeing something on a crime show about preserving evidence. I got a paper bag from the kitchen and put the clothes inside. I felt stupid doing it, but I was desperate to have some kind of proof. I folded the top of the bag closed and wrote the date on it. My husband and I barely slept. I kept waking up thinking I heard someone outside. The next morning, I called my dad before my daughter woke up for school. His voice was warm when he answered, but it went cold and hard as I described what happened. I could hear him getting angrier with every detail. When I finished, there was silence for a few seconds. Then he told me the officer deliberately violated every protocol in the book. He said that kind of calculated behavior means he's done this before. Dad's voice was different from I'd ever heard it. He was furious. He walked me through exactly what evidence I needed to collect. He told me which agencies to contact and in what order. His retired cop knowledge was suddenly the most valuable thing in the world. He explained how internal affairs works and what they look for in complaints. He told me about body cam policies and evidence preservation. He was mad that someone wearing the same badge he wore for 30 years would abuse it like this. His anger helped fuel my own determination. I wasn't just scared anymore. I was ready to fight back. I got my daughter ready for school myself instead of letting her take the bus like usual. I drove her and scanned every car in the parking lot. I memorized which teachers were on duty at drop-off. I watched every person walking near the building. My daughter asked why I was acting weird, and I told her I just wanted to make sure she got inside okay. Principal Roman was standing by the front doors. She noticed my anxiety right away. She asked if everything was okay. I told her we had a rough night and I'd explain later. She nodded and said to call her if I needed anything. After I watched my daughter go inside, my husband drove me to urgent care. A doctor came in and I explained what happened the night before. She was professional but gentle. She examined every mark and bruise and took detailed photographs with a medical camera. She wrote notes about the location and size of each injury. When she asked if I wanted a sexual assault exam, I almost broke down. I explained it didn't go that far. She nodded and finished documenting everything. She gave me copies of all the photos and her notes. Back home, my husband showed me what he'd been working on while I was at urgent care. He'd done 3 hours of research. He had tabs open about body cam policies and evidence preservation laws. He'd found the complaint procedures for internal affairs. He made a spreadsheet with contact information for internal affairs, the Civilian Oversight Board, and 3 different lawyers my dad had recommended. He'd organized everything by priority and deadline. I was amazed at how thorough he'd been. We sat down together and drafted a public records request. We asked for the body cam footage from my arrest. We requested the booking area surveillance recordings. We asked for any other recordings from that night. My husband read it over 5 times to make sure every word was exactly right. He checked the legal language against examples he'd found online. When he was satisfied it was perfect, we submitted it through the city's online portal. The system gave us a confirmation number. I saved it in 3 different places. For the first time since the traffic stop, I felt like maybe we had a chance at getting justice. That afternoon, my husband drove me to Arturo's office in a building near the courthouse. The waiting room had worn chairs and legal posters on the walls. A receptionist showed us to a small office where Arturo sat behind a desk covered in folders and papers. He stood up to shake our hands and gestured for us to sit. My dad had described him as someone who takes police misconduct cases seriously, and I could see why when he pulled out a yellow legal pad and started taking notes without any small talk. I walked him through everything that happened at the traffic stop and the station. He wrote constantly, but never interrupted me. When I got to the part about the locket and the threat about my daughter's school, his pen stopped moving and his jaw tightened. I described how other officers walked past the interrogation room and saw what was happening, but nobody said anything. Arturo put his pen down and leaned back in his chair. He explained that filing a formal complaint with Internal Affairs was the first step. His voice was steady but serious when he told me I needed to prepare myself for retaliation and intimidation. He'd seen departments close ranks around officers like this. The process could take months with no promise of justice at the end. Other officers might harass me or follow me around. The union would fight back hard. My husband reached over and squeezed my hand. I looked at Arturo and told him I was filing the complaint anyway. This officer would do it again to someone else if nobody stopped him. I couldn't live with myself knowing I had a chance to prevent that and didn't take it. Arturo nodded slowly and said he'd be with me every step of the way. For the first time since the traffic stop, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely powerless. We spent another hour going over what documents I needed and what questions Internal Affairs would probably ask. When we left his office, the sun was setting and my husband suggested we grab dinner. But I just wanted to go home. That evening, I was heating up leftovers when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice said my name and then identified herself as Jolene Rivers, the female officer from the station. My hand gripped the phone tighter. She spoke carefully, saying she couldn't discuss an ongoing situation but wanted to make sure I was okay and knew my rights. I thanked her for trying to help me that night. There was a long pause on the line. Then she said some officers forget they're supposed to serve and protect everyone, not just use the badge for power. Her voice was quiet but firm. She hung up quickly after that. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and realized she was risking something just by calling me. If anyone found out she contacted me, she could face trouble from other officers or her supervisor. My husband asked who called and I told him about Jolene. He said we needed to document everything, even phone calls like this. After dinner, we sat at the kitchen table with our daughter. My husband explained that we needed to make some new safety rules for school. We told her she had to use a code word if anyone ever approached her claiming to know us. The word we picked was butterfly, because it was something she'd remember. We explained that from now on, only me or my husband would pick her up from the school, and the office would check our IDs every time. If anyone else tried to take her, even someone in a police uniform, she should run back inside the school and tell a teacher. She looked confused and a little scared. We tried to frame it as extra safety steps after some confusing grown-up stuff happened. She asked if we were in trouble, and I told her no. We just wanted to be extra careful for a while. My husband showed her how to use the emergency call button on her phone that would dial both of us at once. She practiced it 3 times until we were satisfied she understood. I barely slept that night. Every time a car drove past our house, I jerked awake. When a branch scraped against the bedroom window, I sat up fast with my pulse racing. My husband held me and promised we were going to get through this. I could feel how tense his body was even though he was trying to stay calm for me. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and checked all the locks on the doors and windows. I looked out at the street to see if any cars were parked where they shouldn't be. Everything looked normal, but I didn't feel safe. I went back to bed, but just stared at the ceiling until the alarm went off. The next morning, I logged into the city's Internal Affairs website. I uploaded copies of all my documentation, the medical records from urgent care, the photos of my bruises, and the timeline my husband and I had written. I attached the urgent care doctor's notes about each injury. The system made me check boxes confirming I understood filing a false complaint was a crime. I checked every box and hit submit. A confirmation page appeared with a case number. I wrote it down in 3 different places. I texted Arturo a screenshot of the confirmation. He replied right away saying this was good because now they had to investigate. The case was officially in the system and they couldn't ignore it. Around noon, I was folding laundry when my phone rang. The school secretary's voice sounded worried. She told me someone had called the office that morning asking detailed questions about my daughter's schedule and pickup procedures. The person claimed to be verifying information for school records, but the secretary thought the questions were strange. She wanted me to know right away. My hands started shaking. I grabbed my keys and told my husband I was going to the school. I drove there in 12 minutes and parked in the fire lane. The secretary buzzed me into the office immediately. I asked exactly what questions the caller asked. She said they wanted to know what time my daughter's classes ended, which door she used to leave, whether she took the bus or got picked up, and if there were any adults authorized to pick her up besides parents. The secretary said the voice sounded like a man, but she couldn't be sure. I asked to see the principal right away. The secretary led me down the hall to Principal Roman's office. She was reviewing papers at her desk, but stood up when she saw my face. I closed the door behind me and explained that someone was asking suspicious questions about my daughter, and I needed to update the school's security procedures immediately. Principal Roman listened carefully without interrupting. She pulled up my daughter's file on her computer and started adding flags. She typed in special instructions that only me or my husband could pick up my daughter, with photo ID verification required every single time, no exceptions. She marked the file so any staff member who pulled it up would see the alerts first thing. She set up a note that my daughter should not be released to anyone claiming to be a police officer, unless I was physically present to confirm it. When she finished, she looked at me and said she trusted my judgment and they would keep my daughter safe. She didn't ask for details about why I needed these measures. She just made it happen. I drove home from the school and spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on normal tasks like making dinner and helping my daughter with homework. That evening around 8 o'clock, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. There was breathing on the other end for maybe 5 seconds, heavy and slow, like someone was making sure I knew they were there. Then a man's voice came through, quiet and calm in a way that made my skin crawl. He told me I should think carefully about my daughter's future before I kept talking to lawyers and filing complaints. The line went dead before I could respond. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. My husband saw my face and grabbed the phone from me, immediately opening the settings and turning on the call recording app. He set it up so every incoming call would be saved automatically from now on. We sat there for a while not saying anything, both of us understanding that this wasn't going to stop on its own. That night we stayed up until almost 2 a.m. researching home security systems and getting quotes online. By morning we'd ordered new deadbolt locks for all the doors, a video doorbell camera, motion sensor lights for the front and backyard, and a monitored alarm system that would alert the police if anyone tried to break in. The total cost was over $1,500 that we really didn't have in our budget, but the idea of sleeping without some kind of protection felt impossible now. Feeling slightly safer in our own house was worth every penny, even if it meant cutting back on other things for the next few months. The next day around lunchtime, I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized the area code as local. I put the phone on speaker and hit play. Jolene's voice came through, careful and measured, like she was choosing every word. She talked about patterns of behavior she'd observed over her 3 years at the department, never naming names or giving specific examples, but making it clear she'd seen things that bothered her. She said if I was working with a lawyer, he should request personnel files going back at least 5 years because sometimes the full picture only becomes clear when you see everything together. The voicemail ended with her saying she hoped I was doing okay, and to take care of myself. I played it 3 times, then forwarded it to Arturo with a text explaining who she was. He called me back within 20 minutes. His voice had this energy to it, like he just found something important. He explained that personnel files could show a pattern of complaints and disciplinary actions, and patterns were exactly what we needed to prove this wasn't just one bad interaction. That same afternoon, Arturo sent formal evidence preservation letters to the police department, the city attorney's office, and the IT contractor who managed their digital systems. The letters demanded they preserve all body cam footage, surveillance recordings, and digital logs from the night of my arrest. He explained to me over the phone that these letters created a legal obligation, so if anything disappeared after this point, they couldn't claim it was an accident or routine deletion. The letters went out by certified mail, so we'd have proof they received them, and when. 5 days after I submitted my complaint, I got an email from Internal Affairs. My stomach dropped when I saw the sender's name. I opened it standing in my kitchen with my laptop on the counter. The email was short and formal, stating that the officer's body cam had experienced a technical malfunction that night, and no footage was available from his camera. They were very sorry for the inconvenience. I read it twice, then called Arturo immediately. He wasn't surprised at all. He said this was exactly the kind of convenient excuse that made these cases almost impossible to prove, and he'd seen it happen before in other departments. But his voice also had this determined edge to it. He told me not to panic because we weren't done yet. The next morning, Arturo filed a motion with the court demanding the maintenance records for that specific body cam. He wanted to know when it was last serviced, if there were any previous malfunction reports, and why it supposedly failed on this particular night. He also pointed out in the motion that their response never mentioned the booking area cameras or the hallway cameras, which should have captured at least some of what happened. He was turning into a bulldog about this whole thing, pushing back on every excuse and demanding answers to every gap in their story. His determination helped me stay focused instead of giving up, which I'd been tempted to do more than once already. 3 days later, a letter arrived from the city attorney's office on official letterhead. My husband brought in the mail and handed it to me with a worried look. I opened it expecting more bad news, but Arturo had prepared me for this. The letter acknowledged they were placing a litigation hold on all evidence related to my case, meaning nobody in the department or city government was allowed to delete, destroy, or alter anything connected to my arrest. Arturo called that evening after I texted him a photo of the letter. He actually sounded pleased. He explained this was good news because it meant they were taking the threat of a lawsuit seriously enough to preserve everything. It also meant that if something did disappear now, we could argue they did it deliberately despite the litigation hold, which would look terrible for them in court. 2 weeks after my arrest, I started noticing a dark blue sedan behind me when I drove places. The first time was when I left the grocery store. The second time was the next day when I picked up my daughter from the school. The third time was that same afternoon when I drove to the post office. The car always stayed back a few car lengths, never getting too close but making the same turns I made. On the third day, I managed to get a partial plate number by slowing down at a red light and checking my rearview mirror. I wrote it down as soon as I parked, then called my dad. He had a friend who still worked in records who could run plates quietly. Within an hour, Dad called me back. The sedan was a personal vehicle registered to someone who worked at the police department. He wouldn't tell me the name over the phone but said I should document every time I saw that car and write down the date, time, and location. I started keeping a notebook in my car just for this purpose. That same week, a court date notice arrived in the mail for my resisting arrest charge. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. I had to take a day off from substitute teaching to deal with it, and I felt terrible about that. The principal at the school where I'd been working that week was understanding when I called to explain I had a court date, but I didn't give her details about why. I felt ashamed that my colleagues might find out what happened, even though I knew logically I hadn't done anything wrong. The guilt about leaving my students for a day mixed with the shame about the charge itself, and I spent that evening feeling like my whole professional reputation was at risk over something completely fake. Arturo called me within 2 hours of me texting him about the court notice. He told me not to worry and that he'd handle it. The next morning, he contacted the DA's office directly and negotiated a continuance. He argued that prosecuting me while I had an active internal affairs complaint created a conflict of interest, since the same department that arrested me was also supposed to be investigating whether that arrest was proper. The DA apparently agreed pretty quickly. Arturo called me that afternoon to say they'd postponed the hearing for 60 days, which gave us time to build our defense and see what came out of the internal affairs investigation. He sounded satisfied with how that went, and I felt a small bit of relief knowing I had 2 more months before I had to stand in front of a judge and defend myself against charges that shouldn't exist in the first place. That night, my husband started researching media contacts while I was putting our daughter to bed. I came downstairs to find him with his laptop open to the local news station's website, his finger hovering over the contact form. He looked up at me with this determined expression I'd never seen before. He said we should tell everyone what happened, post it on Facebook, contact the newspapers, make sure the whole city knew what kind of cop was out there. I felt my stomach drop because the idea of going public made everything feel more real and dangerous. We sat at the kitchen table and I tried to explain that making noise might make things worse, that the officer already knew where our daughter went to the school, that we needed to be careful. My husband's voice got louder as he argued that staying quiet was exactly what corrupt cops counted on, that silence protected them while we suffered. I raised my voice back, something I almost never do, saying I was the one who got violated and I got to decide how we handled it. He stood up from the table and paced the kitchen, running his hands through his hair. I started crying because we'd never fought like this before, both of us scared and frustrated and not knowing the right answer. He came back and sat down, taking my hands, apologizing for pushing when I was already dealing with so much. We agreed to call Arturo in the morning and get his advice before making any decisions about going public. Arturo called us back within an hour of my message the next day. He said going public before the internal affairs interview would be a mistake because we didn't know yet what the department already knew or what evidence they had. He explained that media attention could actually hurt our case by making it look like we were trying to pressure the investigation instead of letting it run its course. He also warned that reporters would want to interview our daughter, take photos of our house, and dig into every part of our lives. My husband asked if we should just stay silent forever then, his voice tight with anger. Arturo said no, just wait until after the interview so we had more information and could control the narrative better. He reminded us that the department would use anything we said publicly against us, twisting our words to make me look like I was lying or seeking attention. I agreed to wait even though part of me wanted to scream the truth from every rooftop. 2 days later, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Layla Sasaki, a reporter who covered police accountability for the local paper. She said someone had tipped her off about my internal affairs complaint, and she wanted to do an on-record interview about what happened. My heart started racing, and I asked how she got my number and who told her about the complaint. She said she couldn't reveal her source, but that this kind of story mattered for public safety and accountability. I stood in my kitchen gripping the phone, torn between wanting everyone to know what that officer did and being terrified of putting my daughter in more danger. Layla's voice was calm and respectful, as she explained she understood this was difficult, but that my story could help other women who might be going through similar situations. I told her I needed time to think about it and talk to my lawyer. She said she understood and gave me her direct number, asking me to call back within the next few days. I called Arturo immediately after hanging up with Layla. He asked if I'd said anything on the record and seemed relieved when I said no. He told me I could decline the interview, but that I shouldn't lie or deny the basic facts if asked directly. The next morning, Layla called again, and I told her I couldn't do an on-record interview right now, but that I wasn't denying the complaint existed. She thanked me for my honesty and said she'd be filing public records requests for the complaint documents and any related materials. She promised to be respectful of my privacy while still covering the story, because it mattered beyond just my individual case. I appreciated that she wasn't pushy, but I still felt exposed knowing a reporter was digging into everything. The email from Internal Affairs arrived exactly 3 weeks after my arrest. The investigator Gary LeBlanc wanted to schedule my interview for the following week at the station. I stared at the email for 10 minutes before calling Arturo, my hands shaking. He said this was good, that it meant they were taking the complaint seriously enough to move forward. We scheduled 3 different preparation sessions over the next week, meeting at his office each time to go through every possible question. Arturo played the role of hostile investigator, interrupting me with skeptical questions about my timeline and memory. He asked why I didn't scream louder, why I didn't fight harder, why I waited to file the complaint. Each practice session left me exhausted and angry, but also more prepared. We went over the documentation again and again until I could recite dates and times without checking my notes. Arturo warned me that they'd try to find any tiny inconsistency to use against me, that I needed to stay calm and factual no matter how aggressive their questions got. The night before the interview, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my chest getting tighter and tighter. Around 2 in the morning, I sat up gasping, convinced I was having a heart attack. Sharp pains shot through my chest and down my left arm. I couldn't catch my breath no matter how hard I tried. My husband woke up and immediately started getting dressed, saying we were going to the emergency room. I tried to tell him I was fine, but I couldn't get enough air to form words. He helped me to the car and drove to the hospital with his hazard lights on. The ER doctor ran tests and hooked me up to monitors, then came back an hour later to say my heart was fine. She explained I'd had a panic attack, that the symptoms felt exactly like a heart attack but were caused by extreme anxiety. She gave me information about trauma counseling and breathing exercises, suggesting I talk to someone before the stress caused more physical problems. I felt embarrassed that my body had betrayed me like this, but the doctor was kind and said panic attacks were common in people dealing with what she called institutional trauma. The internal affairs interview took place in a small conference room on the second floor of the station. Walking back into that building made my skin crawl. Gary LeBlanc was already there with his supervisor, whose name I didn't catch. Arturo arrived right after me and we sat down across the table from them. Gary started explaining the process when the door opened and another man walked in. He introduced himself as Riker Boyd, the union representative for Gerald. My stomach dropped because I'd thought this was supposed to be a fact-finding investigation, not some kind of trial. Arturo's jaw tightened, but he didn't object, just made a note on his legal pad. The whole atmosphere changed with Riker there, everything feeling hostile and adversarial instead of like they actually wanted to know the truth. Gary asked me to walk through everything that happened from the traffic stop to my release. I kept my voice steady and factual, describing each event in chronological order. When I got to the part about the search, Riker interrupted asking how I could remember exact details from a stressful situation. Arturo cut in saying that trauma actually enhances memory of certain details, and that my account was consistent with the written statement I'd filed. Riker kept interrupting with questions about whether I'd been drinking, whether I had any history of making false accusations, whether I understood that filing a false complaint was itself a crime. Each question felt designed to make me doubt myself, or get angry enough to say something they could use against me. Gary's supervisor mostly stayed quiet, just watching and taking notes. I could tell they were looking for any inconsistency, any crack in my story they could exploit. Arturo shut down the most aggressive questions, reminding them this was supposed to be an investigation, not an interrogation of the victim. 2 days after my interview, Arturo called to say Jolene had submitted a written statement to Internal Affairs. He'd gotten a copy through his records request. She'd been very careful in how she worded everything, not directly accusing Gerald of wrongdoing, but documenting exactly what she observed. Her statement described how she'd offered to process me according to protocol, how Gerald had insisted on handling it himself despite her objection, and how he'd taken me to an area that wasn't normally used for booking. She noted the time, who else was present, and the exact words of their exchange. Her statement didn't say Gerald did anything wrong in that interrogation room because she wasn't there to see it, but it proved that proper procedures hadn't been followed. Arturo said this was huge because it corroborated my account that something unusual had happened that night. The department's response came by certified mail 3 days later. They were filing a counter-complaint against me for making false statements in an official complaint. The letter claimed I'd fabricated the allegations to avoid responsibility for my arrest, that I was slandering a decorated officer, and that making false statements to Internal Affairs was a crime. My hands shook reading it. The same day, a letter arrived from the police union's legal team threatening to sue me personally for defamation if I continued spreading what they called lies about Gerald. They demanded I retract my complaint immediately and issue a public apology. I called Arturo in a panic, and he said this was pure intimidation, that departments and unions always tried this tactic to scare complainants into backing down. He told me we weren't backing down, that their aggressive response actually suggested they were worried about what the investigation might find. The next day, I sat in Melanie Schaffer's office, a small room with soft lighting and a couch that was probably supposed to feel comfortable, but just made me more aware of how wrong everything was. She asked me to start from the beginning, and I made it through describing the traffic stop and the booking area before my voice started shaking. When I got to the part about the locket and his threat about my daughter, I couldn't hold it together anymore and just started crying. Melanie handed me tissues and waited, not rushing me or looking uncomfortable with my breakdown. She said my body was having normal reactions to an abnormal violation, that the fear and hypervigilance and panic attacks were all expected responses to what happened. Somehow hearing that I wasn't broken or crazy helped more than I expected. Over the next few weeks, I saw her twice a week, learning breathing exercises and grounding techniques for when the panic started. She helped me understand that the violation wasn't just about the physical search, but about having all my power stripped away by someone who was supposed to protect people. 4 weeks after my arrest, Arturo called with news that made my hands shake for a different reason. The hallway camera footage from the station showed Gerald deliberately walking me past the normal booking area toward that isolated interrogation room. It wasn't proof of what happened inside, but it proved he deviated from standard procedures exactly like I'd said. Arturo explained this was huge because it corroborated my complaint and showed Gerald had deliberately avoided the area where other officers and cameras would document what he was doing. The footage showed the timestamp, showed Jolene at her desk in the booking area, showed Gerald leading me in the opposite direction down that dark hallway. We immediately filed for a temporary protective order requiring Gerald to stay away from me, my family, and my daughter's school. The hearing got scheduled for the following week, and I spent those 7 days terrified of having to testify, but knowing I needed this protection. My husband helped me practice what I'd say, and Dad coached me on staying calm and factual even when I wanted to scream. The morning of the hearing, I put on my most professional outfit and tried to look like someone a judge would believe instead of someone falling apart. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and Gerald sat 20 feet away with his lawyer. That same creepy smile on his face, like this was all just amusing to him. When the judge called me to testify, I had to describe the locket threat and the phone call while looking at Gerald's smirking face. My voice shook, but I got through it, sticking to the facts and timestamps exactly how Arturo had coached me. Arturo presented the hallway surveillance footage and the recordings of the suspicious phone calls to my cell. He argued that Gerald had demonstrated a pattern of threats and intimidation that put me and my family at risk. Gerald's lawyer tried to paint me as paranoid and vindictive, someone making up stories to avoid responsibility for resisting arrest. The judge listened to everything, reviewed the evidence, and granted a temporary protective order but made it narrow. Gerald had to stay 100 yards from me and my home, but the judge wouldn't extend it to my daughter's school without more concrete evidence of threat. It was something, but it didn't feel like enough protection when I knew he'd recognize that school uniform in the locket picture. I met with Principal Roman the next day to finalize a detailed safety plan, even though the court hadn't required it. My daughter would be walked to and from class by staff members. She'd eat lunch in a supervised area instead of the regular cafeteria, and pickup would happen at a side door with photo ID verification required. Principal Roman assured me they were taking this seriously, even if the court didn't see the full danger. She flagged my daughter's file in their system and briefed the teachers and office staff on the protocols. 6 weeks after my arrest, the DA's office called with a plea offer. They'd reduce the resisting arrest charge to failure to obey a lawful order with just a fine and no criminal record if I agreed not to pursue civil action against the city or Gerald. Arturo and I both knew this was them trying to make the whole thing go away, to silence me with a deal that sounded reasonable, but would mean Gerald faced no real consequences. I was so tempted to take it just to end this nightmare. The constant fear, the security measures, the therapy sessions, the legal bills piling up. Part of me just wanted it over, so I could try to feel normal again. But Arturo reminded me that accepting any guilt admission would undermine my IA complaint and civil case. My dad agreed, saying these kinds of officers only stop when someone forces accountability, that if I let Gerald get away with this, he'd do it to someone else. I thought about that other woman somewhere who might end up in that interrogation room if I didn't fight back now. The next day, I called the DA and declined the plea deal. I told them we were going to trial if necessary, that I wouldn't admit to a crime I didn't commit just because it was easier for everyone. The DA sounded surprised. Like most people probably just took whatever deal got offered to avoid the fight. She said the offer would stay open for another week if I changed my mind, but I knew I wouldn't. 7 weeks after my arrest, my pretrial hearing happened at the courthouse downtown. Gerald's lawyer filed a motion to dismiss, arguing there was no evidence I actually resisted arrest. Arturo argued that the arrest itself was unlawful because there was no valid reason for the traffic stop in the first place. He presented my driving record showing I'd never even gotten a parking ticket, the lack of any traffic violation that night, and the body cam footage that conveniently malfunctioned. The judge took everything under advisement and said she'd issue a ruling within 2 weeks. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt drained, but also strangely proud of myself for not backing down. That same week, while I was still processing everything from the hearing, Layla published her article on the local news website. I found it because 3 different people texted me the link within an hour of it going live. She kept her promise about not identifying me, but anyone who knew about my case would recognize the details. The headline read, "Local woman files complaint after traffic stop. Body cam mysteriously fails." She laid out the timeline using only public records and court filings. She detailed how the traffic stop happened without any violation. She explained how a male officer conducted a search despite a female officer being available. She raised questions about why the body cam malfunctioned at such a convenient moment. She quoted the protective order filing without naming me or Gerald. The comments section filled up within hours. Some people defended the police and said I was probably lying for attention. Others shared their own stories about bad experiences with traffic stops and searches. A few people recognized which school uniform was in the picture based on Layla's careful description, and that made my stomach turn. My phone rang constantly that day with reporters wanting interviews. I ignored every call except one from my principal checking if I was okay. 2 days after the article ran, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail while I was making dinner. I almost deleted it without listening because I'd been getting so many spam calls, but something made me check the number first. It wasn't one I recognized, but it had a local area code. I put the phone on speaker and pressed play. Gerald's voice came through clear and calm. He said he saw my car at the school today, and that it was nice I was so involved in my daughter's education. Then he hung up. I dropped the spatula I was holding. My hands started shaking so hard I had to grip the counter. He was watching me. He knew where my daughter went to the school. He was making sure I knew he was watching. My husband came into the kitchen and saw my face. I played the voicemail for him 3 times while we both stood there trying to process what we just heard. Then I saved the recording to 3 different places. I emailed it to myself. I uploaded it to cloud storage. I sent it to my dad. My husband wanted to call 911 right then, but I called Arturo instead because I knew we needed to handle this strategically. Arturo answered on the second ring, and I could hear the change in his voice when I told him what happened. He said to send him the recording immediately, and not to delete anything from my phone. He said this was exactly the kind of mistake officers like Gerald make when they think they're untouchable. Within an hour, Arturo submitted the voicemail to Internal Affairs, to the court handling my protective order case, and to the DA's office. He labeled it as evidence of witness intimidation and violation of the protective order. He included a detailed memo explaining how the timing right after the article proved Gerald was monitoring my case and trying to scare me into backing down. 48 hours later, Gerald's supervisor placed him on administrative leave pending investigation. Arturo got the notification through his contacts at the department and called me immediately with the news. I cried on the phone with relief and fear mixed together. Relief because Gerald wouldn't be out on patrol where he could accidentally run into me. Fear because now he'd be angry and have even more time to focus on me. The next day, Gary from Internal Affairs contacted Arturo requesting Gerald's complete personnel file. Arturo told me this was huge because it meant they were finally taking the investigation seriously enough to look at the bigger picture. When the file came through, it showed a pattern that made me sick. 15 complaints over 8 years about inappropriate conduct during searches and traffic stops. Most involved women. Most were dismissed after brief investigations. A few resulted in written warnings or mandatory retraining. But the pattern was right there in black and white if anyone had bothered to look. 3 women complained about unnecessarily long searches. 2 complained about comments he made during traffic stops. 1 complained about him showing up at her workplace days after a ticket. All of them were told there wasn't enough evidence or that the officer's account was more credible. 8 weeks after my arrest, I sat in the same courthouse for what I hoped would be my last hearing on the criminal charge. The judge reviewed all the evidence Arturo had submitted. She reviewed the lack of any traffic violation. She reviewed the body cam malfunction. She reviewed the protocol violations. She reviewed the threatening voicemail. Then she dismissed the resisting arrest charge entirely. She said the traffic stop lacked reasonable suspicion, and therefore everything that followed was unlawful. I heard the words but couldn't quite process them at first. My husband grabbed my hand. Arturo smiled for the first time since I'd met him. We walked out into the courthouse hallway and I just started crying. My husband held me while people walked past staring. I felt vindicated but also completely exhausted. The weight of 8 weeks of fear and stress and constant vigilance came crashing down all at once. That same afternoon, the police department issued a press release announcing a comprehensive policy review of search procedures and body cam protocols. Arturo called it damage control and warned me not to expect real culture change. He said departments announce policy reviews all the time when they get bad press, but actual implementation is rare. Still, it was acknowledgement that something went wrong. It was the department admitting publicly that their procedures needed examination. The next week, Arturo filed a formal notice of claim against the city. He explained this was the legal step required before we could file an actual lawsuit. The notice demanded compensation for violation of my civil rights and the trauma Gerald inflicted. It detailed every protocol violation, every threatening action, every moment of fear my family experienced. The city had 90 days to respond before we could move forward with court action. At home, the stress started affecting my marriage in ways I didn't expect. My husband felt helpless because he couldn't fix what happened or make me feel safe again. I felt guilty for putting our family through this nightmare. We'd always been good at talking through problems, but this was different. One night after our daughter went to bed, we sat at the kitchen table and had an honest conversation about how we were both struggling. He admitted he'd been having trouble sleeping because he kept replaying that night and wishing he'd been there. I admitted I sometimes resented that he got to feel angry while I had to stay strategic and controlled. We decided to start having weekly check-ins where we could talk about how we were really doing, instead of just pushing through. A few days later, a letter arrived from Gerald's lawyer. It suggested I was mentally unstable and had fabricated everything for attention. It claimed I had a history of making false accusations. It threatened to expose my pattern of behavior if I continued pursuing action against Gerald. My hands shook reading it, but Arturo's response was swift. He sent a cease and desist letter reminding them we had documentation of everything. We had medical records, we had witness statements, we had recordings. We had Gerald's own voice on my voicemail threatening my daughter's safety. He warned them that continued harassment would only strengthen our case. That weekend, my dad suggested we temporarily relocate to his house across town until things settled down. At first I refused because it felt like letting Gerald win, but my dad pointed out that protecting my daughter mattered more than pride. My husband agreed after thinking it through. We packed up essentials that Sunday afternoon. Clothes for a few weeks, school supplies, my daughter's favorite stuffed animals. I felt sick putting everything in boxes, like we were running away. But every time I hesitated, I thought about that voicemail, and Gerald knowing exactly where to find us. My dad's spare bedroom barely fits the queen bed and my daughter's air mattress on the floor. Our suitcases line the walls and her stuffed animals crowd the dresser. The bathroom has one sink and we all share it. My husband sleeps on the couch downstairs, but my daughter doesn't complain once. She helps unpack her school supplies and hangs her favorite drawings on the walls with tape. That first week, my dad teaches her how to play rummy and poker with pennies. He tells her stories from his cop days about helping lost kids find their parents and rescuing cats from trees. The good stuff that reminds her police work can be about protecting people. She laughs at his jokes and asks him questions about his old cases. Watching them together at the kitchen table with cards spread out makes the cramped space feel less stressful. 10 weeks after my arrest, my daughter goes back to her regular classroom instead of remote learning. The security plan stays in place. A staff member walks her between classes. She eats lunch in the library with a teacher nearby. Pickup happens at the side entrance with ID checks every single time. I watch her carefully for signs that everything is too much. Bad dreams or stomach aches or not wanting to go to the school. But she seems okay. She talks about her friends and her art projects and the book her class is reading. She doesn't mention anything about being scared or worried. I know trauma can show up later in weird ways, so I stay alert. But for now, she's handling it better than I expected. Kids are tough like that sometimes. I returned to substitute teaching 2 weeks after we moved to my dad's house. Walking into the teacher's lounge feels strange. Some people smile and say welcome back like normal. Others glance at me and then look away fast. I know Layla's article got shared around. People put the pieces together about the unnamed woman who filed the complaint. During lunch, 2 teachers I barely know stop by my classroom. They don't ask direct questions, but they say things like, "Good for you," and "That took courage." Principal Roman pulls me aside after school and walks me to her office. She closes the door and tells me she read everything. She says she's proud of me for standing up and fighting back. She promises I have her full support, and if anyone gives me trouble to let her know immediately. Her words make my eyes water, but I hold it together until I get to my car. One afternoon, I'm driving past the police station to pick up my daughter from the school. I spot Gerald standing near the side entrance in regular clothes, jeans and a black jacket instead of his uniform. My heart starts racing so fast I think I might pass out. My hands grip the steering wheel and I force myself to keep driving normal speed. He doesn't look my way. He's talking to another officer and laughing about something. But seeing him there in person after weeks of just thinking about him makes everything feel real and scary again. That night at my therapy session with Melanie, I tell her about it. She explains that always feeling on guard and watching for danger is a normal response to what happened. She says it's called being extra alert, and it will get better slowly as I start feeling safer again. She teaches me breathing exercises to use when my heart races like that. The protective order hearing happens at 12 weeks. Arturo and I sit at a table in front of the judge. Gerald sits on the other side with his lawyer. The judge reviews all the evidence again. The voicemail recording where Gerald mentioned seeing my car at the school. The internal affairs investigation findings that show a pattern of complaints about his behavior. The booking area footage that proves he violated protocol. Arturo argues that Gerald's actions show he's still a threat to my family. His lawyer claims the voicemail was taken out of context, and Gerald was just making conversation. The judge doesn't buy it. She grants a full 1-year protective order. Gerald has to stay 100 yards away from me, my home, and my daughter's school. His face goes red when the judge announces her decision. I feel my shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. My therapy sessions with Melanie become part of my weekly routine, like grocery shopping or taking my daughter to the school. Every Tuesday at 4, I sit in her office and we work through the scary thoughts that pop into my head. She teaches me tools for managing the anxiety, counting backwards from 100, focusing on 5 things I can see and 4 things I can touch, writing down the thoughts instead of letting them spin around in my brain. I start doing meditation every morning before everyone else wakes up. Just 10 minutes of sitting quiet and breathing. It helps more than I expected. Melanie also tells me to stop reading news articles about the case and definitely stop reading comments online. I set that boundary and stick to it. No more checking my phone at midnight to see what strangers are saying about me. 3 months after my arrest, a registered mail notice shows up at my dad's house. I sign for the thick envelope at the post office. The return address is from the police department property division. Inside is a smaller padded envelope with an evidence tag stapled to it. I open it alone in my car in the parking lot. My mother's locket falls into my palm. The chain is tangled and the clasp is bent, but it's here. I open the locket and see my daughter's picture still inside. The same picture Gerald stared at and used to threaten me. I hold it against my chest and cry so hard my whole body shakes. This tiny piece of my mom that he took and used as a weapon is finally back where it belongs. I sit there for 20 minutes just holding it before I drive back to my dad's house. That evening, I sit at my dad's kitchen table watching my husband help our daughter with her math homework. He's explaining fractions using pizza slices and she's actually getting it. My dad is cooking dinner and the smell of garlic fills the whole house. The civil case against the city is still moving forward. Arturo says it could take another year or more. Gerald hasn't been charged with any crimes even though everyone knows what he did. But sitting here with my family doing normal homework and making normal dinner, life feels like something I can handle again. I'm not the same person I was before that traffic stop. That version of me didn't know how cruel people with power could be. This version knows and won't ever forget. But I'm also stronger now in ways I never wanted to be. And I'm teaching my daughter that fighting back against people who abuse their power is worth every hard moment. That's a lesson that matters more than any math problem. That's today's story wrapped up. Thanks for staying till the end. It honestly makes sharing these moments feel special. I hope it brought a little bit of peace or happiness to your day. Subscribe if you'd like to come back for more good stories.